All right, everybody. Welcome to Skeptarchy. I'm Corey, one of the co-hosts, and I'm joined by...
I'm Dallin Earth.
I'm Eric Standing.
And I'm Kevin. No last name because you don't get one.
Yeah, that's right. I guess I didn't say my last name. Corey Johnston.
We can just do that?
I mean, you don't have to do last names if you don't want to.
No, that's okay.
This whole Dallin Earth is not my legal name, so...
Oh, well, there you go.
It's all good then, hey? All right, so I guess I might as well go first. I think my topic is probably the easiest and least complicated. Unless you guys want to talk a little bit about current events before we get started.
I mean, I feel like it's probably a good idea to bring up the big story of the last week, which has been the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg from the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, one could say it's for sure a little concerning about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I honestly, I think what's more concerning to me is that one person dying gives us this much of a concern about what will happen. Like, her death being this concerning is itself very concerning because there is no reasonable system under which the death of a single person should throw an entire country into this much chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where people's basic human rights are fundamentally held in place by this 80-year-old person who's had multiple cancer scares and health issues in the last year. And
yeah.
Seems something's broken there.
Our basic human rights should not be dependent on the continued life of an octogenarian woman. So,
yeah, you know, what's actually more scary to me is I think that if the Republicans were smart, they wouldn't nominate anyone because an open judicial seat really activates the evangelicals on the abortion issue a lot. Maybe fortunately, it looks like Trump is not that smart because he's already talking about nominating someone in the next few days. Because I was actually more worried about this helping his voter turnout. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
So what does it do if the fight they've been fighting for the last 30 years, they win? What does that mean? What does that do, right?
I mean, I knew when Trump was running, like the religious people that I spend a lot of time around, they were disgusted by Donald Trump. But their number one issue is abortion, and they told themselves, you are voting for Supreme Court judges. And that is what got a ton of these evangelicals on his side. Now, maybe he's developed his cult enough that he doesn't need that as much anymore, but that was a huge factor in Donald Trump winning that election and turning out a lot of people who would otherwise hate him, you know? So I really am afraid that the smart thing for them to do is to hold this seat open in order to drive right-wing voters to the polls. But I mean, it sounds like Donald Trump's not going to do that. So I don't know. I mean,
who knows what's going to happen then?
He talks a lot of shit. So, I mean, just because he said he's nominating someone next week means, you know, virtually nothing. So.
Yeah, and then there's at least some whispers of certain Republican senators saying that they won't vote for a passing. So there's at least some small hope that they might actually have, you know, a semi-ethical stance on this.
Sometimes semi-ethical is about as good as we can hope for, I guess, you know.
Sadly.
Such awful timing and kind of just a blow to the pro-choice movement for sure, you know, and it's just, I don't know what else to say about that, really.
Yeah, I'm definitely considering just going and getting my tubes tied. Like, was pretty sure I wasn't interested in having biological kids anyway, and at this point, like, I think it would be way worse to be stuck in a situation where I was pregnant and couldn't get an abortion than to just get my tubes tied now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
just stop the risk right away.
Yep.
How is the U.S. with access to, they call it the Plan B pill here? It's like the next day.
So it's called Plan B here as well. As far as I know, it's commercially available, like over the counter in most places, but I don't know about, like, I live in Massachusetts. We're very heavily, about those sorts of rights, but other states, particularly down south and in the Midwest, are going to be a bit more of a crapshoot as far as that goes.
Yeah, I'm in Minnesota, which is a blue state. So, I mean, it's going to be, we have pretty good low-income healthcare available, and it's covered under all of our stuff. The only issue that you might run into is the non-metro areas are pretty red, and you could definitely run into a pharmacist refusing. Like, that's happened before in Minnesota, like a specific pharmacist saying, fuck you, and go somewhere else, and somewhere else maybe an hour away. And
yeah, well, so it's technically classified as over the counter to the point where I've heard you can actually buy it through Amazon. So
really?
that may be a way around it for a lot of people for whom that might be a needed thing.
Yeah, I've always had good access to more permanent forms of birth control, so I've never had to like go get it, so I'm not sure exactly, but I know there's been lawsuits in Minnesota about pharmacists refusing, and they get taken to court later, and it's found that they should have just, made an accommodation, but that doesn't really help the person in the moment who needs to get the Plan B.
Yeah, exactly.
A court case 2 years later does not solve the problem.
I'm actually a bit worried about people like you, Del, who are looking to get, more permanent or semi-permanent sterilization surgeries, because in the U.S. and in, more conservative areas especially, there are a lot of doctors who simply won't for whatever reason, because their excuse is, oh, well, you're too young. You don't know if you want children or not yet. And, because it's often an irreversible procedure, they simply refuse to do it, which is complete and utter BS. But so for people wanting to get tubes tied or hysterectomies or anything like that, they may find that difficult to get in certain areas if the social attitudes in those regions are not conducive to it. Hell, even in Massachusetts, a lot of OBs and gynecologists just won't do it. There's one in particular in my area that I've actually referred a couple of people to just because my spouse had a great experience with them, who will, but even here, it's apparently a very difficult procedure to get, which plays into another current event story about the ICE detention center in, I want to say, Atlanta or somewhere near there, giving detainees, forcible sterilization procedures. So it really brings an interesting light to the whole concept that the U.S. is almost entirely based on a white supremacist ideology when you have our government giving people sterilization procedures against their will and then refusing to give it to usually young white women.
Right. Yeah, so I have two cousins who both had kids and were consenting adults and both got refused for years, and did both finally get their sterilizations. But lucky me, I have a genetic disorder. So I've had doctors offer to do it for me because they're like, well, if you don't want to pass it on. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just take that and use it to my advantage, I guess. If you're just going to be cool about it and that's your reason, fine. I guess that's what I want to do. I'll take it. But it's kind of a gross reason that people have the opposite opinion about me.
It kind of goes to show that eugenics doesn't need to be like an overt, forcible thing. It can be very, very subtle. Like if doctors are completely willing to, give someone that procedure when they have some sort of genetic abnormality or anything that they might pass on, which would be considered detrimental to, the child. But, if they're relatively healthy, no, can't get one.
Yeah, and like one of the reasons that I'm not interested in having a pregnancy is partially because that disorder makes pregnancy possibly permanently disabling to me. So like for some people, they are interested enough in having kids that they're totally willing to risk that. But was kind of on the fence about it anyway. So I just plays into the equation in a way that I'm just really, really not interested. So I was floored when I had an OBGYN say it would be totally cool. I mean, I was like 23, 24 maybe. And they were like, yeah, we'd do that. We could schedule that right now.
That's unheard of.
I know. It's completely unheard of anyone's experience that I've ever heard in my area or any other area. So when he said he would do that, I was like, really? And he was like, well, yeah, of course. You have this. And I'm like, okay. Thanks for the offer. I'm not going to schedule that right now. I mean.
Wow.
But yeah, I just listened to the most recent Sawbones. They did sort of a history of hysterectomies and sterilizations and eugenics in the United States specifically. And they were talking about how the way some states have tried to rectify that past of doing these procedures on people without their informed consent and not understanding what they were doing is by doing things like putting into place these waiting periods and these signatures. And even like, apparently there's like knowledge tests that some states make you take where you have to answer a set of questions correctly before they'll let you have the procedure.
Wow, that doesn't sound like a voting literacy test at all.
Right, and the waiting periods where you have to make multiple appointments, it sounds just like the abortion restrictions. And they were trying to say that they were doing that in response to this eugenics shit. But in reality, doctors are just using it when they want to prevent someone from getting sterilized and ignoring it when they're like all about, you not having kids.
Well,
here's a thought. Let's just respect consent. How fucking hard is this?
And the forced sterilizations in the ICE camps are totally reflective of what happened. I was just reading an article, I think, in the early 70s, right there, 70 through into the 80s with the 1960s scoop of First Nations people here. A lot of people were thrown into medical institutions that were basically a lot of it was introduction to tuberculosis. So there would be brought into these hospitals, and the idea was to give them tuberculosis for whatever reason, whether it was to, in their minds, maybe develop an immunity, but quite often we're starting to think it was, just to get people sick, right? And then further on from that, once they were admitted, so many young women were subject to forced sterilization. And when I look at the dates of this kind of stuff, I was floored that it was happening in around the time I was born 42 years ago. But then to hear about it happening, in these camps under force today, it's just I just have this sinking feeling like we're heading back into the dark ages. We're denying science. We're just listening to the loudest person, and it's a scary thought for sure.
Well, there's cases, I think lawsuits have been settled in the 2000s in California in prisons of forced sterilizations, and not forced so much as coerced. Like, you can get all your prison time cut in half if you undergo sterilizations and things like that people were subject to. And a lot of people went through with it because, I mean, who wouldn't be desperate to get out of there?
Right.
There was
it's really never stopped.
Yeah. There was even some cases in Canada here, even in Saskatchewan, where Indigenous women were being sterilized in hospitals. It was as recent as last year that they discovered some of them were happening. So against their will and without their knowledge, and just, it's still, people just do it and think that they're doing something. I don't know what they think really, but it's quite bizarre. Like this idea that you can just take away somebody's right to reproduce, but then on the same, like you can stop them from, you can, like, it's all about controlling who, I guess, has the children and who gets to increase our population.
Yeah, it's all about controlling the, who can and can't have kids, and in being able to control that, you control the, you have some level of control over future generations, and it just turns into this, vicious but really, really subtle way of exerting that control upon a society.
Yeah, and even like you say, like it's even like people who are working in a hospital that may not have any overt, like they might not believe they're white supremacists, right? They just think, well, this is for the best, but that's just how colonialism and white supremacy gets reinforced over and over again by people who think they're doing the right thing, but instead they're taking away the rights of various groups.
Right.
So that's not depressing at all.
No, not at all.
So is that just our current events banter, or was that someone's topic?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, unless y'all get anything else, I'm sure there's plenty more going on in this insane, ridiculous world that I haven't come across.
Well, I mean, one of the things that really caught me, other than RGB passing, was this Trump's patriotic education thing that he's pushing now.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
He was speaking at the like a conference. I can't remember the name of the conference or convention or whatever it was, but talking about how teaching anti-racism is the same as teaching anti-American sentiment. And
wow, amazing. Teaching anti-racism is anti-American? That almost suggests that racism is American.
Yep.
Seriously, how do you make these statements and not realize what you're saying? Like, that is just, it is such an obvious thing. Anti-X is anti-Y, so that means X is related to Y. I mean, this is basic logic 101 shit, and it just spills out of his mouth like nothing. I swear to God.
Do they not have these moments like I often do of, wow, now that I said that out loud, it sounds completely stupid. I think this doesn't happen, right?
No, they don't have those moments. I'm
sure if Trump has those moments, he would never admit to them.
True.
Yeah.
So anyways.
So that's that. That's current events.
Current events, wildfires burning like crazy. On one positive note on that, I read that it's somehow influencing woodpecker populations to thrive. Things, and so maybe, some burning of the undergrowth might, I don't know. I really don't know where to go with that one. It's a scary prospect, but people have been saying for years that there should be just kind of controlled burns, kind of things like that. But I don't know. When you're seeing the smoke here in the middle of the prairies in the middle of Canada, it's got to be pretty unnerving for sure.
Now, this is something I've heard, but I have not fact checked in any depth, which is that the idea of controlled burns is actually something that was originally practiced by natives in the area centuries ago to combat this exact sort of thing.
I've heard of it before, yeah, and how wide scale it was is another thing. I'm also starting to realize that it most likely wasn't just small bands of people kind of existing together and living off whatever came by. California was probably had massive cities, massive civilizations that were there. So just in order to really, keep that many people going, for as far as wood needs and things like that, for shelter and everything, I think there would have been a lot more clearing out of things. Novel that, well, not a novel, but a book that I'm reading, American Holocaust, it describes some of the cities as just being absolutely overwhelming. And this to people who had been in Paris and London, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of going off on a tangent there, but it's just a really fascinating book. So, yeah, I don't know where to go on the California wildfires. I mean, it's unfortunate how it happened. And I think there's a lot of people who are willing to jump down the throats of, the people who had their gender reveal party or whatever, right? But, I couldn't imagine putting myself in those people's shoes and how horrible they must be feeling right about now, right?
Yeah. And
I mean,
the concept of a gender reveal party is just completely ridiculous to begin with, but I'm sure they did not fathom the extent to which that might just completely get out of control. It's there's some leniency for ignorance in this case, I think.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I mean, climate change plays a pretty big role in this. So there's a systemic issue to this as well, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If we just raked the forest, it would be fine. We just got to get out there with rakes.
Just got to rake them leaves up into piles and throw them in the dump or something.
Yeah. Just treat it like it's all one big backyard. Just go out, rake up the leaves, put them in bags, take them to a nice, safe burn pile. We'll be fine. It's not like there are hundreds of millions of square miles to be raked up.
Nope.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's easy.
Totally. Super, super easy.
All right, so let's move on from current events, and I'll talk about my topic here. I wanted to kind of look at just a basic view of mask wearing, and there's two different kind of scenarios here. First, I have the Black Lives Matter protests, and when it first kind of started, I was encountering people who thought that this was for sure going to increase a spike in COVID cases. And back in June, there was a study done that showed that it actually just hadn't. There was no spike from the Black Lives Matter protests at all. And it turns out they said that it's probably not related to the social distancing, because obviously nobody in a protest area was practicing social distancing. But I did, and they don't necessarily mention masks in the study that I read, but there are images of people and everybody's wearing a mask at all of these protests and things. So it seems to me like that makes sense. There's a video that came out from Minute Physics that showed that even if a mask reduces your transmission by 50%, and if both people are wearing it, then that reduces the transmission by 75%. And so it's not 100, but if you get everybody in a scenario doing that and reducing transmission by 25%, that's quite a dramatic difference from no reduction at all, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that really shows with the Sturgis motorcycle rally in which nobody wore a mask. And about 2 weeks after the events, they were linked to more than 260,000 cases of COVID. so this is...
I was really curious about that because that paper that extrapolated 260,000 cases or whatever, it also extrapolated like healthcare cost of like 1.5 billion. And I was wondering, I wonder if there's any like legal way for all the states that were impacted to like sue South Dakota for that money. Because I just feel like South Dakota's government should suffer some consequences for allowing this, you know? Like why does, like Minnesota is where the first couple people died from the Sturgis rally, right? And it's like, you know, why, you know, we were smart. So like, why do you get to just like outsource that impact? Because so like you have like virtually no population. Nobody, these people were all just spreading it back in their other states, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if like there's any sort of legal way to do that, but
I'm not sure how many. I remember reading ahead of time that there was a whole bunch of citizens of Sturgis who begged the event organizers to not do this year because the number of people that would be there would be so high, and they knew that it was going to be this huge risk. But on the other hand, these the event organizers, this is the only time of the year that they make any money, and there's a genuine situation to be empathetic about, but also like you're putting hundreds of thousands of lives at risk for this motorcycle rally.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just it. You know, I was going to mention the mighty dollar in there that whatever week or so that it's going on is probably some people's, 90% of their income, whether it's a little gas station in the area or whatever, right? Like a leather jacket, I don't know, whatever businesses there are at the place. But, so at the end of the day, I think, and basically South Dakota, I think tourism is probably, next to agriculture is probably one of their number one things. I mean, they've got the Crazy Horse Monument, the dead presidents up there, and Sturgis, are the three kind of big, well-known things. So, I just wonder how heavily tourism, South Dakota may have played a hand in that decision as well.
Yep, for sure. In my notes, I've also got this one link. It's an article written by Matthew Fasciani about how did mask wearing become so politicized. I didn't get a chance to go through it and make some notes or anything, but it's a really good article, so I'm going to include it in the show notes for people to read anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is strange how it has become like that, and I haven't read up very much on what happened in 100 years ago, and whether there were people who were just against it in general, or if we were just more likely to trust our scientific and medical professionals back then, because in all the pictures and everything, everybody's wearing them, and it seems to have been the way to fight off the so-called Spanish flu or whatever.
Well, there's no doubt that this bizarre propaganda machine, I don't know if we can really give like the Republicans all the credit for it. I don't know how much of it is the Russians and how much of it is dark money from who knows where, but there's this huge propaganda machine that's been put behind politicizing the mask thing, and people are just so easy to manipulate.
It seems like mistakes made.
Go ahead.
It seems like everything, though, any topic today can be seized upon by journalistic provocateurs, and again, both sides. But it's almost like you're seeing people who should be reporting facts, but instead they're thinking about what can I say right now that is going to piss off the most amount of whatever demographic, whatever voters, whatever political party, so it's just a whole lot of provoking, it seems like. And I'm, the thing I'm scared about is to what end, who's really going to win once we're all split up, right?
Nobody. I mean, because it's just for clicks, right? Because clicks is the only way to make money. And just like those people that wanted the Sturgis rally to go on, they're desperate to survive and they need money to survive. And these outlets need money to survive and they're desperate, right? So it's just this cycle where everybody's just clawing to stay alive and everybody loses.
Yeah.
Yay, capitalism.
Capitalism, the bubble that always bursts.
Right. What could possibly go wrong trusting in greed?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. I guess I wanted to say too, that there were mistakes made at the start when the major organizations started talking about mask wearing and saying, well, maybe you shouldn't wear masks. Don't worry about masks, because they wanted to save the N95 masks for the medical professionals and all that. So maybe it sent the wrong message and it was too easy to attach to. And like, it's just, there's a lot of angles to it, I guess.
Well, there's been a lot of like miscommunication and bad communication from the medical community over all this. Mainly because the initial advice was that masks weren't needed, and it was less to do with the fact that, proper PPE was in short supply and they wanted to reserve that for healthcare professionals. More to do with the fact that they actually thought that like non-medical cloth face masks could potentially make things worse, because people being people, we have a hard time not touching our faces, which is, a pretty common thing because, I find especially, when I'm not supposed to touch my face, I tend to do it more because, then suddenly all of these little itches and things that I need to scritch and adjust and all that, tend to come up, and I'm far more aware of them. And so the reason they actually didn't want face masks was because they thought people would be touching their faces more and touching the outside of the mask more. And so that might actually end up causing a greater spread. And eventually with time, they figured out, no, it's actually the other way around, that it tends to, be lower transmission rates, but it wasn't clear at the beginning whether or not that was the case. So it took a little time to get that research together, to actually, understand why they work, how they work, etc.
And I have to say, some of the early stuff, because I've had some internet arguments on this topic. Imagine that. Some of the stuff that I was getting from people were articles in which, like, Fauci directly was asked if in, like, February, like when we barely even knew if there were any cases in North America, was asked, if I'm scared, should I wear a mask? And he said, no, it probably won't even help that much, to those people about if they were scared, right? And I think people, Fauci in a perfect world would have followed up on that and said, like, masks will only work if most of the population is wearing them, because masks wouldn't protect you unless it's an N95 and you're wearing and you're following proper surgical sterilization procedures. But instead he just said, no, that's a silly idea. Yeah. And so then people took that. But he was answering a specific question, which was still kind of the right answer.
It was. Unfortunately, medical professionals, especially in a public setting like that, aren't great at volunteering information.
Exactly.
They do tend to answer the question that was asked of them and don't really give a lot of, extra background information. And so that tends to lead to a lot of these problems. I remember...
and the headline is, masks are useless.
Yeah. I remember a little while into it, there was this story that the WHO had said, or there was a study that had said that asymptomatic transmission didn't happen. And I had actually watched a video on YouTube by a doctor, Dr. Mike, who kind of cleared that up in saying that in that specific context, asymptomatic means something slightly different than what everyone, kind of all the lay people think it does. Asymptomatic in that specific context does not have symptoms and will never get symptoms.
Right.
What we tend to think of as asymptomatic would better be termed as pre-symptomatic, i.e. you don't have symptoms now, but you will later. And so people who will never get symptoms throughout the entire course of the infection are essentially impossible to spread it to others. People who are pre-symptomatic, i.e. they're infected but aren't yet showing symptoms, they can still spread it. And so the whole point of masks now is that it's for the people who are pre-symptomatic, who don't know they're infected and don't know that they are contagious and can spread it to other people. And the mask helps cut down on the number of respiratory droplets, the little particles of water that you breathe out when you talk or just breathe in general. Those, blocks those from getting to people. And in the same vein, there's a lot of people who talk about the size of the virus, and that doesn't matter because it's not the virus itself that just shoots out. It has to come in those little droplets of water.
Yeah, I thought I saw something about that study too. Like, they considered symptomatic to be like a mild sore throat and a cough. Which is still something that most people in America would work through without even thinking,
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
I've had an on and off sore throat for the last 3 days. I don't have COVID, or at least I'm fairly certain I don't. But these are symptoms I get semi-frequently even before COVID, because that's just, my body likes to complain about things a lot. And so I'm still going to go out and do things. I've been, for the last 7 months, been trying to stay at home as much as humanly possible. I've been working from home the entire time since mid-March. But it's something where, especially in a country where, medical care is, not terribly easy to get if you don't happen to have the means to get it. And is generally just a pain in the ass sometimes. Little mild symptoms like that are not going to be a thing you worry about.
Yeah. In capitalism, you can't. You gotta keep working.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta keep making that money. You gotta keep yourself alive.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And keeping yourself alive is secondary to working.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. It reminds me of a quote from House, which was when you're a minimum wage worker making, $8.50 an hour, you kind of need that $8.50 an hour. And so you don't tend to, you don't tend to stay home when you're sick because, again, you need that money to continue living.
Right. This is a total tangent, but it's totally related to what we're talking about right now. Speaking of, real skepticism and how it's sometimes terrifying. Have you seen the studies that show that even things like knee replacement and stuff, actually when you compare them to faux surgery are equal?
Equal in what regard?
It's possible that a ton of the surgeries we do specifically on joints actually are not helping.
Oh, okay. So as in the actual joint surgery is roughly equivalent in terms of health outcome to placebo surgeries?
Yes, exactly. And basically, I think it seems pretty obvious why that is, right? You cannot get 3 months to not move your leg.
All right. So, we had a little technical glitch with our recording system, but we are back up and running now. So, Del, you were talking about the surgeries with...
Yeah, so
I can't remember.
Things about skepticism that are terrifying when you start looking into them. They have done studies on various joint surgeries versus faux surgery. So you actually get an incision and you go home with stitches, but they did nothing. And those faux surgeries seem to be performing just as well as most joint surgeries, which is terrifying because it's those are very normal things that people are getting done to them all the time. But I don't know how far the literature has gone into this, but to me, the answer to why that is seems incredibly obvious. And that's that without surgery, you can never get any time off to rest. You can't just get off your knee for 3 months. That's not a thing that our society allows. Even in European societies or governments where we think of things as being a little more humane, you know? Like, we just don't have a society that normalizes, like, yeah, I just need to rest my knee for 6 months. And that's just not something people allow themselves to do unless you're in the context of surgery where a doctor is ordering you to do that specifically because you had surgery. And I had a major surgery a couple years ago. I had a breast reduction, right? And I have a whole farm to run. Like, it's really hard for me to get more than 1 or 2 milkings off, which is like, I have to milk every 12 hours, right? And I had all these people lined up and they were like, yeah, you're supposed to stay out of the barn for a whole month. Like, you're not supposed to lift anything. You're not supposed to do any of that because a breast reduction is like 12 inches of stitches on either side. Like, it's a massive amount of surgery, right? I mean, even like knee replacements and things like that are done with like 3 stitches these days because it's all laparoscopic, right? But this is like 12 inches of stitches on either side. And by the time 2 weeks came around, everybody was so sick of doing my work that I ended up back in the barn anyway. And I still didn't recover as well as I was hoping to, you know? And it's just like, it's so obvious to me that our society handles this stuff just terribly. And I'm speaking probably without backup from the literature on the rest, but I bet if you just actually forced people to rest their leg for 3 months and compared that to the surgery, you would find the same sort of results because we just don't allow people to do that, you know, to take injuries seriously.
Yeah, we live in a society where your worth is almost entirely based on your ability to perform useful labor. And like, that is just such a messed up situation. Like, yes, obviously we need people to do labor because that's how shit gets done. But tying their very ability to survive to their ability to do, 8 to 5 days a week, is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, people do not need to work that much to get the stuff that we need done in society. And, we need to just work or do better at making people actually valued for more than just their ability to move boxes from point A to point B or whatever they happen to be doing in their daily lives. With something like, farm labor, obviously, as you pointed out, that's a little bit harder to make into a realistic, thing because, the labor still has to get done, in that situation. But I think we need to, there's a lot of changes that need to be made about how we go about, daily working life, whether it be agriculture, retail, office jobs, whatever.
Well, and I can get people to rally around me for a surgery recovery in a way that I can't, just because my knee hurts, right? I mean, it's just a whole different thing in people's minds.
Yeah, and like, there's this huge culture of just work through it. Like, you have this pain, you just need to work through it, even if working through it is going to make it worse and, cause more problems in the long run. Like, you cannot get enough time to just rest and get that taken care of. And it's only when it gets to the point of surgery where people recognize, oh, well, you absolutely cannot do this thing for a period of time. And even then, you didn't end up getting the full time that you needed.
Right.
Yeah, it's just absolutely absurd.
So I don't remember what brought me to that topic, unfortunately. I remembered what I was talking about, but I don't remember why.
No, I'm at a loss.
I get it. I guess your idea, Del, being that people are kind of opting for the surgery just for the possibility of getting the time off kind of thing. And, I know so many people now that are caught up in this grind till you shine mentality where if I just work, eventually, I'll get ahead. And I personally have done that before too. And it's just, sometimes it just does not work that way. And for some people it does. There are people out there who can find themselves in situations where, putting in tons and tons of overtime, tons and tons of work are paying off in terms of improving their quality of life. for me, doing lots of overtime and working 12-hour shifts until I was completely exhausted never produced a life-changing amount of capital. It did always produce a life-changing amount of exhaustion, and it was just, it never, I never, by doing that, ever felt like, yes, I have all this money and life is great. I was just completely overworked. And I think a lot of that's just been so normalized now, I think it just 100%.
It's the myth of, it's this myth of hard work will get you where you want to go, and it's never really been true, because there are so many extenuating circumstances about how hard work gets you where you want to go. And if you don't have those 15 other things all in place, then it's not going to do anything for you except make you more exhausted and leave you in roughly the same place. Like, people are always talking about how grueling, doing overtime is, and, they'll celebrate the little bit of extra money they get from it. But in the long run, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You get maybe a couple hundred extra dollars on a paycheck, and sure, that may get you over a hump in the road here or there in terms of just life shit going on. You may be able to pay a little more to your credit card bill, or you may be able to afford that maintenance to your car you've been putting off, but it's never really going to be a life-changing amount.
Because one health scare is going to erase all of it and more. If you do overtime and break your ankle, it's gone.
Yeah, when you live in a society where, half of all people can't afford an unexpected $400 bill without borrowing money, that's never going to translate into people being able to work themselves wealthy. That's never how it's going to work. That's never how it has worked. So,
and I have to say, I fight with this concept every day. I mean, I would say it's just the concept that but I worked so hard. Why isn't this working? Why am I not having any success? Why is working this hard not getting me a break in any way? It absolutely breaks me. Because I just can't get that concept out of my head,
Well, and we do tend to internalize it. I was reading about in the past how the mindset was a little more geared towards, let's say my attempt at being a cobbler was a failure. I, on the other hand, am still a good person, right? But today it seems a lot more like, my attempt at, I don't know, whatever career. I've had so many different ones that has failed, therefore I must be a failure, right? And I don't know if that's a healthy outlook. I really don't think so. But I feel for you. I mean, it's
no, almost certainly not.
No, almost certainly not healthy. Yeah, and it is hard to internalize these things, and just on the side of hard work getting people ahead. I've been at times in my life as a student or whatever, but working for day labor type places, right? And this was as a citizen of the country I was working in. I can't imagine how it must be as an illegal working for less than minimum. But you could easily get up in the morning, go into that office, be waiting there for 5:30, and hang out till noon, not get a job, and have to go home. So, be home by 1. So that's about a 5 in the morning to 1 o'clock day, just in the hopes of actually making some money. Should you get a job, get picked at the office to get a job, you're putting in, from, if you're getting up at 5, you're there at 5:30, you're home at 6, you're putting in a 13-hour day for basically the right to survive. It's maybe enough for a bedroom and a pack of hamburger and whatever, right? There is no goal other than just, basically getting through the day. Whereas on the other side of the coin, I've heard people say, oh, well, we can't increase social spending because it removes dignity from people. They don't don't know the value of earning their money. And this coming from people who have inherited a business, right? Granted, hardworking, honest, great people, but just think that, well, why can't everybody just work hard on the business they inherit, right? And it's just it's so hard, I think, for people who have never seen the other side of the coin to really put themselves in that position.
Yeah, people think that hard work and determination is all it takes, and that's so far from the truth. And getting back to what you were saying about like having internalized this, it is the dark side of the whole personal responsibility narrative, because we've been taught to believe that hard work and determination will always get you where you want to go, which leads to the assumption that if you are not succeeding in the way you want to be, it's your fault. And that in the vast majority of cases just isn't going to be true. Like, yeah, there may be a small minority of cases, but by and large, laziness is not the reason most people are living paycheck to paycheck or worse. It's the fact that the system of capitalism requires cheap labor. It requires people living in this, near poverty situation in order to function. You can't have everyone be wealthy in a capitalist society because it requires workers, and workers have to have a reason to remain, in the workforce, which means they have to be dependent on that work to live, which means you either have a society full of rich people or you have a functioning economy. You cannot have both. It's simply impossible. And so the myth that people who support capitalism say it raises people up from poverty, like, fuck no, it does not. It may raise a country of people up from poverty, but every wealthy country is supported by at least 2 or 3 poor countries. Mm-hmm. And like every wealthy person is supported by hundreds, if not thousands, of poor working class people. Like, you cannot have a wealthy person without hundreds or thousands of people in poverty working to make that person wealthy. Hard work is never going to get you $1 billion. It's not possible. Mm-hmm. So you're going to need 1,000 people creating that $1 billion of wealth, and all of that wealth being funneled up to you, which means they are getting paid less than they are making in terms of value creation. Like, you don't even need to read Marx and all of the other various thinkers to realize some of the most basic fundamentals of how capitalism works. It does not need to be this big academic thing. It can be incredibly simple and incredibly straightforward, and you need all of 5 minutes to think about it.
Well, and that's like one of their actual ideas about what socialism means. They think that if we have socialism, that means we're all wealthy and there will be no workers. There will be no people who clean toilets because they have to do that in order to not starve. Because there would be they can't fundamentally think of a different way of running society where we each do various jobs to clean up after ourselves, or, take care of the things that are part of society. They think we're all doing it either to get rich or because we have no other option or we're going to die.
Yeah, like the concept of mutual aid and of actually living in a system in which people work not for their own benefit necessarily, but to help out those around them and to make sure that everyone is getting what they need. They think that is just so unrealistic. They can't even fathom the idea of a society working like that. And we have examples of societies working like that and actually doing quite well, even in the modern era. But, go back, 100, 200 years, and we still see societies that were able to make that work for a period of time. Some longer than others, and most of these failed to survive, not because the system itself was somehow problematic, but because outside forces specifically went in to destroy them, because it did, or largely because it did show that, hey, things can be done in a different way that doesn't make literally everyone but a few people at the top utterly miserable.
Well, and I think it's a testament to the fact that I think human nature melds better with the system that you're describing, Kevin, that like even under capitalism, I think a lot of people who are, you know, janitors cleaning toilets are thinking of their jobs that way, as like contributing to society and being helpful. You know, I'm farming. I don't make any money farming. Most farmers at this point, and the median farm income in the United States is like negative $2,000 and has been for decades. You know what I mean? People are still finding ways to do things that give back to society, even if they're not all fun and rainbows and they aren't making them rich. You know, people naturally do tend to do this kind of work, even if you're not paying them $100 an hour, you know? So
yeah. And like, I mean, for most of the history of like post-industrial revolution, so much of society's value has come from unpaid labor, specifically the labor of women in the household, because like getting someone to clean the house and, you know, do the cooking, take care of the kids, all of that is unpaid labor, and it's incredibly valuable not just to an individual household, but on a mass scale to all of society. And all of that was unpaid, and it still to this day is not recognized as the valuable labor to society that it is. And so it's, you know, so much of how our society is built has actually been reliant on unpaid labor. And so I think people getting to a point where they understand that, hey, maybe we could all do this labor on a more equitable, you know, playing field, and people can do the work that's needed, not because they're getting paid to do it or because they're forced to do it to survive, but because they recognize that it has value to the people around them and needs to be done. And I had another point I was going to make, and then it just escaped from my head, as they are wont to do. So,
well, and
yeah, it's a situation where we need to rethink how society is structured on a mass scale.
I totally pick up on what you're saying, Kevin. I mean, as is so often the case, you know, what a person is most qualified to do and will help humanity the most. And I feel like I'm experiencing some of this right now, like on a personal level. You know, kind of what I've been trained to do and what I've been qualified to do and what people tell me I should be doing is, for lack of a better word, taking a long time. During this long time, the the company isn't going to say, oh, it's okay, you know, we'll wait. The landlord isn't going to just kind of let me hang out for a little while. So rather than waiting for, you know, as long as I can, having some kind of safety net where I can hold out to do this job that I feel will better service humanity, you know, chances are I'm going to be running out to look for whatever's hiring, whatever's close, whatever's a paycheck, right? And the kind of trap therein is that, oh, well, I'll just do this temporarily, and then you know, in all my free time and energy, I'll go look for something else. And it's 40 hours a week of whatever it is it tends to consume, right? But, you know, I think there's hope for, you know, I don't want to spin into a big negative rabbit hole with this podcast. So I think there is hope for that, but we just need to have more like-minded people, you know, on a government level or something to be able to have that kind of social safety net to say, you know, okay, I make a way better barber, a way better psychiatrist than I do a forklift operator, right? So, you know, and that would be really nice. But unfortunately, the way it seems to be going is, you know, I'm going to work here because I don't want to get evicted, you know.
Yeah. And I remember what my other point was, which I think, Del, you were talking about human nature and how it's more predisposed to cooperation and helping one another out. And it's ironic you say that, because so often the people who support capitalism say that human nature is inherently greedy and selfish. And I'm like, maybe in the communities that you spend time in where, capitalism is considered the best and most prosperous system, everyone there is greedy and selfish. And that's because capitalism promotes greedy and selfish behavior. It promotes people looking out for themselves and not giving a shit about anyone else. And so people adopt that mentality just to survive. And you said, Eric, it made me realize that the other defense capitalists usually give is that, capitalism promotes innovation, promotes new ideas. And I'm like, well, if the person who would produce the innovation and produce the new ideas is stuck in a 40-hour-a-week job and they have no energy or free time, no energy left in their free time to make that happen, then you're actually losing out on a lot of the creative energy of people who could be making new things to make life better and make life easier. So when everything's, when the only metric for success is your profit margin, that makes it impossible for people who aren't profit motivated to actually contribute in a meaningful, positive way towards society. If all you can do is maintain the status quo of your own life, then you're probably not going to be improving society at all.
Yeah, and also what you were saying last episode, Kevin, about economies of scale. I mean, certainly the way that capitalism is set up right now, I mean, without major, sort of reining in of untethered capitalism, economies of scale will erase any creativity that's out there at all, any innovation or startups or any of that,
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Because once you get to a critical mass of capital, you can start wiping out any competition, including competition that's, upcoming to try and unseat you. There's a reason Facebook has been the dominant social media platform for a decade plus. No one else can compete with them. Twitter has managed to hold their own. Instagram got bought up by Facebook. Any other major social media platform is either struggling just to get users because you end up with a situation where, everyone I know is already on Facebook. And so you have to get people to migrate over. And so it becomes this huge, huge change cost to change over to a new platform that costs you time and energy. And then, getting other people to do it as well. So they end up maintaining their dominance simply through inertia.
Right, exactly.
And that's pretty much all capitalism really supports is if you build up enough inertia, that's it, you become unstoppable. That doesn't promote innovation. No. That promotes stagnancy.
Yeah, it's the opposite of promoting innovation.
I've heard it said that the best way to make a small fortune is to have a large fortune. And I find that very true. I was watching this documentary about discoveries, and it was basically, not to take up everybody's time here, but it was about the first guy that I think brought ice to the Bahamas, and how he came up with this brilliant idea, and he was going to line these ships with straw, and he was going to go sail to the icebergs, and you get the rest, right? But, the part they kind of failed to mention or just kind of briefly skipped over was the part where he was able to go to his parents and say, Mommy, Daddy, I have an excellent idea on how to bring ice to the Bahamas. How about if you, build me a ship and give me a bunch of money to hire guys and go get all these ice cubes, right? Whereas,
exactly.
Yeah, the guy in the coal mine, he might be shoveling coal and he might go, holy shit, I got a great idea. I should get some ice cubes and blah, blah, blah. But that's all it is. It's just an idea, and he's got to get back to shoveling coal, right? So.
Yeah, innovation of that style is predicated upon opportunity. You can't create something new if you don't have all the requisites to, or all the existing stuff in place to allow you to do that. If you want to bring ice to the Bahamas, you have to have a ship and you have to have access to straw and a crew and all of these other things that you need just to be able to perform that transport. You have to have money to make money, as the saying goes. And like that saying is incredibly true. So few people are able to come up from nothing. In fact, I would argue that basically no one is. It's always been more about opportunity than it has been about ability or creativeness or anything like that.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, do you want to hit your prepared topic?
I will, yeah, sure.
Why not?
Anyways, I've been paying attention to the activist Tristan DeRoche. He is a Métis man from, where is it, Air-Ronge, Saskatchewan, and he physically walked from Air-Ronge to Regina, 693 kilometers, 430 miles for my American colleagues here. And he fasted for 44 days, what is known as kind of, so basically think of a bread and water diet. I don't know, it's probably an all liquid diet. And so he did this in order to raise awareness for the horrendous rates of suicide that we face here in Saskatchewan. It has been it's been pretty high. It's been what's the word I'm looking for? Higher than average, higher than per capita. It's been just out of control, and lately it has spread to non-native communities as well. So I came up with the stats of 224 people in 1 year. 170 of them, 170 males and 54 females, and it goes on and on. But anyways, he walked there basically to propose that immediate action be taken. The premier wouldn't meet with him. He was literally across the street from the premier. Premier wouldn't meet with him. In fact, the premier decided to get an injunction to have him removed. A judge overruled it and basically allowed Tristan to stay. I was able to attend his camp. He had a teepee set up, and then he had a whole bunch of photographs of people who had taken their own lives so it was really just it was really eye-opening, and to do some of the reading up on this that I did, there's a lot of the communities here in Saskatchewan, the native communities are really remote. And, so you basically have all the socioeconomic problems out in the forests or in the country. So the access to help really isn't there. And on the one reserve here in Saskatchewan just in my own opinion, I've always been fascinated ever since I was a young person in the experience of Black people in the South, because growing up here in Saskatchewan, it was the closest thing that I really had to compare being a First Nations person to. The kind of discrepancies in quality of life that I saw around me, the incarceration rates, the ongoing things like that, addiction rates and things like that. It was really, in my mind, only comparable to the African American experience in the South. But anyways, Magua Sagehigan, forgive my pronunciation. 3 youth suicides in 3 weeks, the most recent one being a 10-year-old girl, and 7 in 3 years. This is a population of 1,000 people. I recently moved from a small community in North Dakota of 1,000 people, non-Indigenous. And, were this to happen there, and I hate to compare, but, the outcry and the just outrage would be absolutely intense, and I'd like to think that people would stand up and that bills would be written. So it's a really grim situation, and it is spreading. And with the help of people like Tristan DeRoche and the other people that were there, I think we're able to concentrate more on healing, education, return to spirituality, and basically a pride in oneself, right? But anyways, it was really an honor to be there and to see him and to see the people supporting him, and just to pick up on a real fun kind of positive vibe that he had going there. There were fiddles and music, and I've found that about a lot of First Nations protests, activists, actions, whatever you want to call it. It's generally seems to be more of a mood of healing. I was able to attend Standing Rock for a brief period, and it was, just tremendous healing, good times, music, food, all that kind of stuff. So just don't believe what you see on I don't need to tell you guys that. But anyways, I just really think that what Tristan DeRoche did was incredible, and I think it's really shameful of Scott Moe to not at least meet with him.
For sure.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's in line with his previous actions that he's done. There has been there were teepees set up in the Wascana Park across from the legislature. I think it was 2 years ago now, and he and the Sask Party consistently tried to have the police remove them, and they would get them removed, and then overnight they would be back up again. Like the protesters were. Or the demonstrators were very resourceful and willing to just have their stuff taken down and rebuild it, and it was entirely peaceful. And it was like there's always, I mean, it's Canada and Saskatchewan have always had like a situation where they like to talk a good game about the way that we treat Indigenous peoples and the way that we are really supposedly committed to reconciliation, but their actions are always just the opposite.
I would just expect, like, at least, some sort of meeting where you say nice platitudes and then do nothing about it. It just seems so ridiculous to, like, it's just so blatant to just be like,
just
no,
refuse.
I'm just going to call the cops. Yeah. Like, what?
Right. And then the same day post a picture of yourself enjoying ice cream with your family, on the other end of the city or whatever. It's, ignorant.
Yeah.
If anything, it just goes to show me that elected officials are not the people we want to rely on when it comes to actual meaningful change.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Eric, what are some of the ideas that came out of that protest as far as, positive steps forward? Like, what are the demands? I imagine it's a really complicated issue, but...
Well, and, the argument is always, well, you just can't throw money at the problem. Well, surprise, we live in a capitalistic society. Yes, you can throw capital at a problem. I think the Pillars of Life or something had committed to $1.2 million, which at one time did sound like a lot of money. But when you consider the remoteness of these communities, the cost to fly in professionals, the salaries of the professionals, etc., is really just a paltry sum. But I feel like Tristan and the movement that started there have awakened a lot of people on a provincial and a federal level that, okay, we do need an actual suicide prevention bill. And the unfortunate part of that was that the NDP did propose one, I believe last year, and it was turned down. And on the exact same year that Saskatchewan overtook Manitoba as the number one leader in suicide, 19.5 per 100,000, as opposed to a national average of 10. So we're just about double the national average here. So I feel like documented, written action towards this with resources devoted towards it are our next step.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely need money to get something done in this society.
Well, and
yeah, more often than not, you'd be surprised how far throwing money at in the right way at a problem can do a lot to help.
Right, yeah, but you can't throw money at First Nations problems. You just can't throw money at problems. But to bail out an oil company, we can throw them a bunch of money.
Oh yeah, we can throw money.
Throw money at that problem.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you can't throw money at certain problems. No, I feel like
throwing money at social, or social programs won't do anything but create dependency. But we can throw lots of money at the cops.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So I feel, and de-escalation counseling, and anti-suicide counseling and things like that to be more widespread, I think is one of the options there too. So just wanted to kind of touch on that one a little bit, and I'll be following it as time goes on here.
So I'm going to do my topic. I'm going to I have two articles. I'm going to just talk about the one, and I'll talk about the next one next time. But so this article is something that I heard about in a podcast that I don't even remember listening to years ago, but I Googled it again to research it for this and found a good article in the Chicago Tribune, actually, from a couple years back. And it's basically about how the entire concept of sort of anti-littering was almost completely funded by big corporations, especially like soda companies, because there was pretty heavy heat on them starting in the 50s when they were starting to switch to plastics. And this heat was coming from environmentalists because plastics were not reusable in the way that glass was. And basically, these companies were causing a lot of environmental damage. And so they actually funded entire councils to put out all of these anti-littering ads. And the whole idea was that this would be propaganda to convince us that pollution is the fault of individual people being shitty and not the fault of corporations, because these corporations were facing actual laws with teeth about their damage to the environment. And so instead, they were incredibly successful at convincing the American public that individual people littering and not thinking about their environmental actions is actually the cause of environmental damage and not giant corporations, and that we all just need to watch out for somebody, dropping that gum wrapper on the side of the road, and that's what's really going to clean up the environment, and not that, so much of this vast waste is just because of these companies who could do things differently, but choose not to, just in the name of profit. And so the ad that was the most successful, they were trying to do this through the 50s and 60s. But in the 70s, they came out with an ad, which is very famous, apparently, to people that are older than I am. But I was not alive in the 70s, so I'm not familiar with it. But it's called the Crying Indian ad, with a man named Iron Eyes Cody, who was a very famous Native American actor. He was actually Italian.
Yep.
But he was the most famous Native American actor in America for a very long time. And so this ad features him in stereotypical Native American, the typical like mishmash of things that from different tribes, canoeing out of the past, watching people litter, and then having the camera zoom in on him as a single tear rolls down his cheek.
I remember.
So it is a picture I have to say, like, I've definitely seen before, even though I never was like watching those commercials on TV. Apparently this ad ran for like 20 years. I mean, it ran forever. And it's considered like one of the most successful advertisements of all time. And it was from the Keep America Beautiful Foundation, which was literally just like PepsiCo and a bunch of other corporations. And they initially had like the Sierra Club and some other groups on board with them, but like within a year or two, those groups all left because they realized it was just a big farce to like whitewash the environmentalism movement and to make people think that it was about individual people's actions in order to discourage actual legislation that would be meaningful. And the whole fact that it was just based on all these horrible stereotypes with this Italian actor pretending to be a Native American is just, it's just so gross on so many levels. And this same individualistic sort of promotion, I just see it continuing in so many things. I think people are like, well, if you just stop buying from Amazon, you know, if people just stop buying from them,
Right, yeah.
that would fix the problem. If people just didn't buy factory farmed meat, you know, I mean, people want it, so the company's got to produce it. You just got to vote with your dollar.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was saying earlier. It's the myth of the individual, that the individual is the one who can make all the change in the world, and that, you know, using the government to make change, well, that, you know, that's the wrong way to do things. Just, you know, vote with your dollar. Be, you know, if something's wrong in the world, then it's your job to fix it. And sure, maybe in some circumstances that has a modicum of truth to it, but in large systemic issues like, you know, those of the environment and pollution, large systemic solutions are going to be needed in most cases. So, you know.
Right, and I'm not saying, like, obviously we should not litter. Like, please don't litter. Like, that's bad.
Right.
We're not pro-littering.
Right, and like if you can individually like lower your electricity consumption, like that's great. That's awesome. Like do those things, but also realize that like each of us doing those things, on one hand, many of us simply can't, right? Because of the horrific pressures that we're put under because of capitalism. Like, many of us can't afford some of the choices that people are saying, well, if you cared about it, you wouldn't buy from Walmart. You know, like there are real companies are purposely pushing us into these, like they are purposely manipulating us to buy at Walmart. And somehow between our two jobs and our crushing debt, we're supposed to figure out how to not buy anything at Walmart ever, or Amazon, or wait, maybe any corporation. And it's just, we're just not really in a position where most people can make those kind of decisions in a meaningful way. And even if we could, you know, these companies are so large and so much of the problem that they're creating is beyond what an individual consumer can impact even by voting with their dollar, that it's just, the whole thing is just propaganda. It's not helpful. It's literally just made to distract us from what would actually matter, which is, you know, laws, holding companies accountable.
Well, yeah, holding these companies
It kind of reminds me of it.
Yeah.
So when I learned about that, it just blew my mind when I learned that the whole thing was just manipulated by these companies in the background for decades and decades. It really blew me away.
Yeah, it was something that I learned about not too long ago on a show called Adam Ruins Everything, which I'm guessing a lot of people are going to be at least somewhat familiar with. And he had actually gone over this exact situation and basically everything you just described. So, you know, that's probably the only reason I know about it, being a 90s kid. But, you know, it goes into the whole again, myth of this individual responsibility when it's these giant corporations that have all this capital and all this economic and even social momentum, and they're manipulating us in order to, shift the responsibility from their bad actions to our bad actions, and saying that they only do it because we want it. I'm like, you could choose not to do it, but that's not what makes you the most money. And so, they're going to go with whatever makes them the most money, not what's good for the environment or the society or whatever it is that, needs to, that should take precedence over their bottom line.
And they can drag this out. They've drug this out for decades and decades, I mean, they've cashed in on this for ages.
Well, and they won't mention that they're dumping industrial waste into the rivers and to the lakes. They would have us believe that, leaving the tap on while we're brushing our teeth is the cause of all these water shortages and stuff, right? And the whole dependency, the wages basically having to be spent at Walmart or Amazon or whatever because that's all people can afford. It really kind of harkens back to this old, I think it was a song or a poem or something, and it was called I Owe My Soul to the Company Store. And it was basically based on, I'm sure you guys are familiar, and before the labor movement where, you went to work at this coal mine. I keep picking on coal mines for whatever reason, but you went to work at the whatever, at the widget factory. And, you had to, you needed a candle to do your work by. Okay, well, you get that from the company store for 10 cents. And then, on and on, you get your lunch and your little diamond in your widget bucket or whatever. And all of these had to be bought from the company store. So basically, you're just existing to make them profit, right? And I mean, on paper, it was put to an end. But I think we all know that living on any kind of budget means you're kind of at the mercy of these huge conglomerations, and it's not always feasible to go to the farmer's market as much as I'd like to and buy the slightly more expensive cucumbers. At the end of the day, I got to feed myself and my kids, so I'm probably going to go where sustenance is cheapest, right?
Mm-hmm. And actually,
or just convenient.
The thing about the company store is slightly more insidious than that, because in a lot of company towns, they didn't pay you in the official currency of the country. So in the US, they didn't pay you in dollars. They paid you in company money. And the only place you could use that money was in the company store. So, they were getting away with paying you literally nothing and just supplying, your bare basic needs from that company store. You couldn't spend that money anywhere else. You couldn't trade it for actual cash. You could never save money. You could, all you could do is live on subsistence from what the company provided you. And honestly, legally, sure, that may have changed slightly, but I'm remembering, stories from 5 years ago where Walmart employees were literally being encouraged to have their paychecks directly deposited to these prepaid debit cards, the Go cards, which are still around, although the actual bit about them being direct deposited has gone away. But it's essentially, they were able to put the money in there, and then you had to pay these fees to get that money out. And it was heavily pushed in the company, by the management to get employees to do this. And then, they were essentially able to get away with paying them less. And then it also goes into, if you've heard the term corporate welfare, what that actually means is that corporations have found ways to get away with paying their workers less and then encouraging them to go on welfare programs like SNAP, or what used to be called food stamps, and other social assistance programs. And it's literally these companies costing the government money just so they can pay their workers less. And like, this is not just limited to Walmart and Target and the other big box stores. You know, you have chain restaurants who've been doing this kind of shit too. And, you know, it's really quite rampant, and it's not that much different from a real material sense from the old company store days, where they could get away with not actually paying you money, or, you know, in this case, less money, and making you reliant on them for your needs. You know, the people who work at Walmart and get paid absolute shit, well, the only thing they can afford is to buy from Walmart. And so it's just this vicious cycle of keeping people in poverty.
Yeah, and I think that the convenience factor plays in too, because as we were talking about, the number of hours that every household is expected to be working now is huge compared to what it was at a certain point, or what it could be in a society that actually functioned properly. So the fact that you're at Walmart, or you can order from Amazon, it plays a huge role. Going to the farmer's market every Saturday is a lot of work compared to some of that stuff, right? And then you can't get everything you need there all in one stop, and it just all adds up. And what really upsets me is, like, by putting out like this concept that it's our individual responsibility to never consume these things that we're being manipulated into consuming, is like, I think that people who are socially aware carry this huge burden of guilt around with them all of the time. And that just encourages people to not be informed about these issues at all, because as soon as they start looking into it, they have to feel awful about themselves. So then they don't even want to know. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I just feel awful, because this goes back to like my experiences in agriculture and organic agriculture versus conventional and things like that. I mean, that's what organic agriculture relies on to make their billions of dollars, is that people are going to feel guilty if they can't afford the more expensive stuff. You know, it's this manufactured guilt, and it can't be healthy for people to carry this around, you know?
And the irony there is that organic markets itself is being so much healthier than conventional. And then when you say you can't afford it, people guilt you into being like, well, what's more affordable? A few extra dollars for a carrot or $1,000 hospital bills, which is entirely playing back on the fact that, the U.S. healthcare system is, you know, entirely for profit and absurdly expensive. And it's just like, they're just supporting one another by selling you this, you know, absolute myth of health food, and then, you know, making you pay more for that. And then when it does absolutely nothing, oh, hey, you're back in the medical system, or worse, the quote alternative medical system, which is more expensive. So that's
the problem, at least in my area of expertise, which is agriculture, is there is no good choice. Like, there is no good choice. Organic folks are just making shit tons of money off lying to you. Conventional folks, the money that's profit is going to the big corporations who are behaving unethically. There is no ethical choice in this scenario.
Yeah, that's the cliche, right? There is no ethical consumption under capitalism.
And it's true, because you can't be ethical under capitalism when all of the labor comes from some form of exploitation or another. And it doesn't matter if you choose to go one way or the other, because no matter which way you go, you're going to run into something where someone has had to suffer for your convenience. So, you know, that's not to say that you shouldn't try to be more ethical with what you can, but just understand that a lot of the so-called ethical, methods of consumption are nothing even close to that, and in many cases are actually less ethical than their conventional counterparts might be. So, you know, try, but do your research and actually understand where your money is going, and what kind of human suffering has been incorporated into it.
But also don't beat yourself up because you can't actually stop.
Yeah, I'm trying to weave that line between giving people an excuse to just do whatever the fuck they want because, nothing's ethical under capitalism, and the massive guilt factory of, you need to find ways to be more ethical or else you're a bad person. Like, it's a lose-lose situation.
I think the bottom line is being politically active is going to make far more of a difference than where you buy your carrots. You know what I mean? Like, being politically active is the only, whatever that means. I mean, voting, yes. I mean, protesting, whatever it is,
direct
being
action,
politically active and aware is what is going to make a difference in these issues. And that's why sometimes I don't even want to talk to people about agriculture stuff, because they say, okay, but if you say this is bad and this is bad and this is bad, I mean, what should I be doing? And the answer is voting. I can't tell you where to buy your food. All of the options are bad. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, personally, I'm very skeptical even about the power of voting, but like, there are definitely actions you can take with,
That's why I said politically active as a general, because I know that
there are definitely actions you can take to try and improve things, and I would say a more generic term that I think would be better used here is just organizing.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, anyway, I think that's a good message to...
I think that's we've had a long evening.
Right.
We'll see how much podcast comes out of it in the end.
Yeah. Where can people find everybody?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at AncomSciCom. That's ANCOMSCICOMM.
Yeah, the best place to find me is Facebook, Dell on Earth. Sure it'll be in the show notes or whatever. I'll put the article that I had up in the show notes as well that I was kind of pulling from. It's not too terribly long. It's a good read if you're not familiar with the background info, so.
I have a Twitter, but I haven't been on it for a long time, so I will get that for next episode. But Facebook, Eric Ray Standing is probably the best for now. And I'm happy with the way this went, guys, and I just feel like it's going to get smoother and everything else as we go along. Well, I will anyway.
We'll work out the kinks. And I'm at Hardcore Skeptic on Twitter and just Corey Johnston on Facebook. And make sure to check out our Facebook page for Skeptarchy and at Skeptarchy Pod on Twitter. And what else? Yeah, check out our website, skeptarchy.com. I guess.
All right. Well, it was good talking to y'all. You have a good evening.
Good night.
Thanks. Have a good one.
It's been awesome, guys. It's been great. See ya.